Hello and welcome to Property Matters. Delighted to be joined today by Suzanne from Resicentral, and we will be talking about all things energy for apart hotels, serviced accommodation and the tourism sector overall, really, because a number of our clients will be in that space. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me here in Dundee. What a lovely space to be. I didn't bring the sunshine, but there's always next time.
So really, I guess the best place to start is just a bit of an introduction to yourself, your background and what you've been doing and how you've ended up in the room with us today.
So, in terms of backdrop, I have been in real estate one way or another for the last 23 years. Predominantly working for a mix of private developers, the likes of Berkeley Homes and Telford Homes, with some smaller, kind of quite big brands up there. And in between that, I've spent 7 years working for housing associations, some 2.5 years ago, including sales and marketing director for Notting Hill Genesis. Wow. Obviously one of London's biggest housing associations. So I'm very versed on the versatile different sectors of the market. If it's anything from social housing through to, I guess, more traditional sales and sales of properties, but also the letting side. Mm-hmm. Change of kind of career, thanks to having another child, as you do, and decided to get into what I'd call the future living space, which I found really exciting and really that crossover between traditional real estate and actually the modern ways of living, kind of including the hospitality part, which I think is really essential now when we talk about future living. So including kind of the build to rent side, the co-living, even the senior living piece, and the kind of need for the end user that they're actually living within a lifestyle. It's no longer actually do I buy or do I rent, it's actually what will be my lifestyle. What do I want? Do I want a swimming pool that I can go down to, or do I want a shared kitchen, or do I want, you know, a wine bar that friends can come and join me at? So I found that whole space really fascinating. And then I guess the back of that is where I've ended up now with Resicentral, actually then understanding the end users' behaviours. And I'm quite fascinated, and I will admit I am an absolute geek in this, the actual data behind it. And even though as a planet, we are all driving towards more sustainable practices, quite often it's down to behaviours of the end users. And the kind of journey I guess I've been on over the kind of last 2 years is really understanding that there's two sides of the coin. Mm-hmm. One is very much about building sustainably, which is fantastic. You know, you've got the likes of sourcing, the way actually construction comes together, but actually the back part of that is really how that end user uses that property. So it can almost eradicate all the hard work which has been done. Yeah. By somebody actually what I call misusing it. And then I guess it comes on to hospitality and the fact of the word all-inclusive. And people will think I'm crazy when I say this, because when I think of all-inclusive, or probably how I would have done 6 months ago, is I would have thought, oh, there's a buffet, a really nice one.
I jumped to cocktails. So.
Well, no, I've got kids, young kids, right? So I think buffet. I'm going to go because it's easy. My kids are going to eat something at that buffet. Then I go, whilst they're in kids' club, Michelle, the cocktails. There it is. And then you kind of notice that there's a lot of waste, a hell of a lot of waste. And actually, is all-inclusive, the way forward? Or actually, is it probably the biggest waster of products? And then you come on to actually sustainability and energy. And sounds crazy, but when you pack your suitcase, is it sun cream, passport, and my Tesco's club card? But why is that coming with me? Well, because that's to jam in the key slot when I go into my apartment.
Yeah, to leave the aircon on when I'm out of my room.
and that's probably the reality of it, because hopefully no one's going to stick their American Express in that and kind of go out for the day. And then I'm a great believer in that once you start learning something, you can't unlearn it. So when you then realise about the energy consumption, as an example piece like that, and also the damage you're doing in terms of carbon footprint and just general waste, to me, then you've got to look at that. And I think that's really interesting then where it sits within hospitality, because I think the word all-inclusive, bringing back to that point, is that people then literally rinse everything. So the cocktails, the food, but also the energy part of it.
100%. I've done that in Scotland, been in an all-inclusive, technically in the wording of your phrasing, cottage, been freezing cold, soaking wet, gone in, whacked the heating up to 28 or whatever it is on the thermostat, put a log fire on, done all those things because I'm cold in the moment. And I'm like, well, I'm on holiday. But would I have made those choices in my own house?
And the answer's probably no. And I think that there's two sides to that. There's being older and understanding that and saying, actually, I wouldn't have done it in my own home. And then there's the other side to that perhaps the younger generation, which we would like to feel or more aware, or we'd hope they are, but actually they've probably never paid the bill. And so if they've never paid the bill, well, yeah, I'm on holiday. But then when you look at it or you start dissecting it across different parts of hospitality, and a really, really good example is probably a caravan park, or what we call, holiday villages, where predominantly these properties, whether they're luxury lodges or caravans, they're actually really massively inefficient. That's just what they are.
Yeah, the way they're built structurally.
And it is what it is. Yeah. But off the back of that, actually, you then start looking at the margins of actually how these businesses are running, because you get a deal. It could be 3 nights away in, I don't know, February. Pretty chilly to be going to a caravan park. Probably a bit more chillier up here, I would say, down than in London. And then if you look at a deal and it could be, I don't know, £130 for 4 nights. Hold on. How on earth, as a business, do you make a margin if you then have the giveaway part of that deal, on top of the fact then that you've got operations, which is huge. These time is money. You've got an operational team, you've got a maintenance team, you've got housekeepers going in and out. And then, guess what? My socks are a bit damp. Well, because I'm away, I'm going to stick them in the washing machine and the dryer. I'm going to put the gas heating on, because predominantly that's what's in the caravans. But you know what? I want to feel cosy, Michelle. I'm going to put on that electric heater, which looks like a fireplace in the living room. Yeah. So you suddenly start looking at that and you go, wow, this is crazy. Now, most people don't actually use necessarily a caravan or a lodge for a particularly long period of time, because they often use them as a base. It's not a resort. Yes, they might have some on-site amenities, but it's very rare. People drive to these places. It's very rare that they're going to be in them all day, but that does not stop them cranking up the heating to 30 because they want it to be warm when they come back. Yep. And also going, well, actually, even if I've got 2 bits to go in the washing machine, I'll do it. And so I think that this kind of hospitality piece is so massive. Anything from, call it a holiday village, through to the all-inclusive 5-star hotel. How do you control that? Massive challenge. And actually, how do you become almost a responsible landlord in those spaces?
Yeah, and then what we're finding on the property side right now is a lot of people are taking on old bed and breakfasts, and because of the category 7, so they don't have to apply for the licensing in Scotland, because we've got SA licensing rules up here. So if you buy something in a category 7, you can just immediately turn it into accommodation without a license. And then they're going, I'm going to make it 10 apart hotels, rooms and suites, as opposed to bed and breakfast, because no one's going to cook breakfast for the next 20 years. No one wants that anymore. and on the back of that, they've now got these multi-purpose properties that are quite extensive in size sometimes, but they've never considered, when they've done the design and the architecture, the energy element.
And it's tricky. And you know why? I often say to people, you've got 2 things which make up that kind of energy piece. Number 1, infrastructure. Yep. So that could be a new build property with the best intentions and hopefully the right kind of SAP ratings. Or the other end of it, and exactly the use case which you're talking about, which is actually retrofitting some kind of energy control into a much older property. And they also come with their challenges, because actually, depending on, I don't know, it could be Wi-Fi strength through certain walls. It could be actually that some of them are listed. It might be that actually some of them don't even have double glazing or kind of the energy efficient pieces there. And so the challenge is even greater, but you're completely right, Michelle, because you suddenly look at these properties and you go, actually, the best intention was there. And just to know, whatever happens in Scotland does trickle down to London. So we're very aware.
You've got licensing coming.
Oh, it's coming fast. And everyone's kind of in a slight panic of how to make that work. But I think that with the rises in energy costs, and I had a rather big birthday on the 1st of October, which marked 40 to me, but to the rest of the country, another hike in energy prices. Amazing how these milestones will be remembered. But it's definitely down to that point then that actually hospitality as a starting point is probably an area of concern, but also it's the margins. How do you then balance the kind of margins with occupancy levels? Because nobody wants to see a property empty. doesn't look good for marketing purposes.
Absolutely.
It's not actually good to have something sitting there, but then you've got the other side to it, which is the void management, because I think everybody's really so concentrated on occupancy levels, but then those properties have still got to be maintained. You've still got to know what's happening, whether it's in individual rooms in an Airbnb, or if it's actually rooms within a kind of, well, a traditional B&B, I guess. So I think it's a difficult manoeuvring ground when it comes to energy, and people don't know where to start.
Absolutely. And you talked about occupancy. When we look at our property deals, we look at a 60 to 65% occupancy. If the numbers work at that, then we can hope for more.
Yes.
Like we'd all love 80, 90, 95%, but you know, if the numbers don't work at that 65% mark, then that's not a deal. And it's something we would either renegotiate or we would walk away from.
Yeah.
But that 65% is based on today's pricing.
Yes.
So if the energy markets hike up, someone isn't going to pay an extra £20 a night to stay in that accommodation. So the only solution is to invest in technology that helps us to control and reduce the costs.
And I think that's the interesting point, because you can't per se pass on the cost to the end user. However, what an interesting kind of piece we've been doing of late is actually fair use policies. And for us, it's about not punishing the end user. And I have to be very, very clear on that, because we also deal in the likes of student accommodation, sake of argument. But I think it's making people aware that technology is a fantastic tool if it's used correctly. And with Resicentral, for us, it's about helping people start what we call their green journey. So people often go, where do I start? Do I need to know how my assets are performing? The answer is probably yes. That would be a good starting part. But also the cost of technology through a stack. And I think people are getting caught out along the way by going, so should I just find out what my meter readings are? So they end up going with one company who just specialises in that. And then you have another one who goes, oh, actually, there could be a party there. Because of the kind of bookings that we're taking on, let's do sound detection. Another one's like, well, actually, maintenance, should we do leak detection? And before you know it, you've got all sorts of different bits and pieces, whereas what we're trying to do is consolidate the lot together and then say to people, look, we'll take you through that smart green journey, and you decide, as you see the data, actually what you should be addressing. Because quite often people will make this assumption that it's one particular piece of data which is then going to solve all of their issues when it comes to property management and energy control. But actually suddenly you see the statistics and you go, well, hold on, this is different. And what's really interesting is then helping almost people get rid of parts of their portfolio or invest in it, or actually have different kind of approaches. So it could actually be that the minute then you look at a whole kind of performance of your, call it portfolio, and you go, actually, the units in this particular block, we know that if we made these changes, actually the energy efficiency would go up. We actually now know that we've got a problem with underheating this particular property. So actually going forward, we probably won't have those units on our books. Yeah. So that portfolio management bit is even greater. But I think then when it comes to the cost part, you get to a point you go, come on, what's reasonable, right? Taking you back, and I'm going to bang on about this because it's a big thing, is the all-inclusive part, right? And I think there's a psychological part to all-inclusive, whether that be a 5-star hotel in Gran Canaria, right, to actually staying in a local serviced apartment for a week. There is this psychological part that I'm here, I'm going to kick off my shoes and I'm going to use what I want. And I think it's kind of bringing it back to that resident and making these certified green parts of the travel industry to say, we are a green establishment. If you stay with us, actually, we are conscious about people and planet. Yeah. But also, there is a conversation point, we believe, about saying, well, look, education is key to this. We've got a fair use policy. So whilst you're here, we want you to have comfort. So through our technology, we can ensure that temperature levels and lighting are ambient. That's fantastic, right? The reality is, well, it's a bit colder up here.
It is.
But if I probably put my heating on at home over about 20 degrees, I think my husband would probably get a sleeping bag and put me in it and say, that's the way forward. However, if you go into a holiday let, probably sticking the heating on 25, you wouldn't even think twice about. And so what we're trying to do with our technology is, first of all, set those parameters and go, well, actually, first of all, let's set some rules. What is actually acceptable and comfortable? Yeah. Right, there's two of them.
For anybody in any age group.
Correct, right? You go, well, actually, this is about right. But then what we do is we don't want to work off programs and scheduling. We find that quite old school now.
Yep.
I say with the exact system in my house, we haven't upgraded yet, but I'm sure through what I'm doing now, there's going to be a real look at that. So the next piece of technology on that was really kind of your nests, being able to do exactly the same thing. Instead of manually do it, you do it off your phone. Whereas the way that we're looking at it is you take it that one step further and you go, well, actually, if no one's there, why is that happening? You know, if there's no occupancy detected, why on earth would it come on and off? Yeah. And, you know, I was sitting on a beach in August and said to my husband, we've left the hot water on. And he was like, sorry, it's on a programmer. So every morning that boiler would be going on, and every evening, because that's what we'd set it.
For the 2 weeks or the week, yeah.
And the heating's not on because it's summer. Well, to be honest, summer we had, that could have been debatable. So you suddenly start going, well, actually, it's taken that one step further. So for us, it's about being able to step in and do that automation piece where you start going, well, actually 21 degrees at a certain point of the year is acceptable. Bringing some outdoor external kind of factors into play. Yep. So if outdoor temperature equates to this, make that thermostat only be able to be set at, say, 21. No occupancy is detected for, say, an hour. We'll drop that from 21 to 18. Give it another hour. We'll drop that down to 16. So you're not taking people literally from boiling hot to freezing. And then they can come in and they go, oh, I'm a bit chilly in here, and they can do that. So for us, it's about creating some thresholds and that smart automation. But the other side to it is the education of the end user, because actually we have got the ability through our app to allow the end users to control parts of that home.
Okay.
So this is a really clever part, and it's up to the operator or the building owner who has that control. So in the case of a let's say that you have got someone staying there for a longer period of time. So let's say it's, I don't know, a month booking, that you could give them control. So through an app, say, well, look, you're staying in this property, you are staying in a smart property. So if you're coming home at 2:00 in the morning and you know it's going to be a cold night, why don't you set it on the bus on the way home? It could be to have your heating on your hallway lights. Then let's say for some reason, I shouldn't say this, but they stop off and get fast food on the way home at 2 a.m. It happens. We've all been there. Well, actually, you've been out of the property. You said you were coming home within an hour. Actually, let's take that straight back. So it's a really nice way of giving the end user, but also putting alerts that actually, did you know that during your time with us, we've got a fair use policy, which we usually fix 10%, but you've used 50% of that. Have you turned off the lights? Oh, gosh. In that app, they're able to do that. So for us, though, it's the give and take, Michelle, that depending on who the end user is, how long their stay is, and the actual environment that they're in, do you give them the control or do you step in and do the automation for them?
And it's interesting you talk about the green accreditation piece. I know a few places recently have been promoting that they've got green credentials as part of their accommodation, and one in particular is a vegan bed and breakfast.
Yes.
And so not only they're doing that, but they're also saying like all their furnishings are animal friendly, etc. And it's for them, it's a niche market that they've got into intentionally. But more and more people seem to want to know about the credentials of the places they're booking because they've done so much work on their homes.
It's funny, back to the bit I said a minute ago about once you learn something, you can't unlearn it. And I've been probably on a marathon, it feels like, for the last kind of 2 months about really looking at the way that I use my home, even down to the things, silly things like love sparkling water. And so absolutely obsessed with the stuff, 2 or 3 bottles of it a day. God, the single-use plastic is horrific, so I've now got a soda stream. I can't now not think of that, so I go to a hotel room, and if there's a plastic bottle by the bed, I'll just use a glass and have the tap water because the principle starts belonging there. And actually, when you start embedding some of this stuff into the hospitality market, it becomes quite a critical part. We're working with another business called Sustonica, who are the only green accreditation in the short stay rental market. Right. And the fantastic thing about them is that for any of the hosts, they have to go for a certain criteria to show that they belong within that. And one of the criteria is actually our technology.
Amazing.
So it's saying, well, look, you've got to have technology which then can create kind of automations and the management of that piece, which is super, super important. But also some of the service apartment providers we've been talking to have actually said it's part of their request for pricing. Yep. So now, actually, for them to win an instruction from a direct client, which is super important, if they don't now bring technology in, they won't come in those ranked as either the top 5 or 10. So actually, from a business perspective now, if it's going to change the amount of people who book, your recommendations, but all I'd say is I've become, my God, so all over the top of it, even kind of single-use I'm going total, they shouldn't be allowed to do this anymore. These miniature bottles, like, what are we doing? You know, I stayed in a hotel not that long ago, which I was quite surprised, still had traditional radiators, didn't even have the kind of, I'm going to call it the Tesco slot to put your reward, you know, card in. So there is a lot of them that still exist out there, and actually I think they're beginning to come unstuck because people are so much more aware. And probably back to what you said, because of things you're doing in your own home.
Absolutely. And I think especially because you've got 2 young children, so as time goes on for you, they're going to come home and say, I've seen this at school and I've learnt this, and they're going to start questioning the actions that you do.
Absolutely.
As a result of what they're learning, and you want to know that you're coming at everything from the best possible place for that as well.
It's their planet, and, you know, I've got a father who's going to be 84 in April, and I'm going to say he jokes. He's not joking. I don't believe he is. I'm so glad I'm going to be out of this world soon. And I'm like, Dad, you know, what a miserable thing to say. And he says, well, no, like, it's been destroyed. Absolutely destroyed, this planet. And he was like, you know, you think about global warming and all these other factors, but actually they're crippling the world and also people's wallets, because people can't afford the energy either. Yeah. And then the reverse side to that is fuel poverty. And I'm very, very, very interested in that as well. Coming from a social housing background, you know, even with the technology we've got, it's really exciting to see how it can be used to address that. Because actually, if you suddenly have data points within a property, you can say, well, occupancy detection has been noted, but hold on, the outdoor temperature is -5, the indoor temperature is perhaps 12, but we actually know the thermostat is turned all the way down. It's been going on for a prolonged amount of time, 3 or 4 days. That would probably suggest in that instance that there's a fuel poverty issue. Yeah. Can they actually afford to heat their property?
Which is so tragic, you know, given that we are a European country and that we've got the wealth that we've got within society, to have people still at home deciding whether to eat or heat. It is just so sad. And as a solution provider within this space, you know, we're looking at new builds, we're doing other kinds of projects, and for us there's a definite passion around building green, but also ensuring that the heat element is maintained within the properties beyond that. And you know, we're talking to yourselves around how we can maybe use that green tech in that space as well, but it's our responsibility in this sort of sector to say what is required and to go beyond the legislation and not just do the minimum.
And you're totally right. You know, the world's gone backwards, and you know, I saw something on Facebook the other day, which then ended up on being on LinkedIn, and it was a post-it note saying, if you want Christmas presents this year, you need to turn the heating down. This was left for the children. You know, and don't get me wrong, children are absolutely spoilt these days, but it is, you know, you can now think that there's probably a panic about parents who are coming up to the winter months, and it's not just how we're going to get through the winter, it's probably how we're going to be able to give our children a Christmas. You know, it sounds ridiculous, but people are literally going, what, do I take out a credit card to be able to give them gifts and pay for fuel? Do we sit here in the dark? And some of the most horrific tragedies which are coming out in the press now, you know, anything from, you know, children dying of mould in flats to actually people who have died in properties and haven't been found. There was one the other day for 3 years. And actually, in the world we're in right now with the tech which is available, it's also about vulnerability reporting. And there's 2 sides to this: fuel poverty, but also if someone isn't seen for a period of time, or detection in a property kind of goes down, has something gone wrong? And it shouldn't be because that person didn't have a relative nearby. That it's absolutely fine for them to have perhaps died in the property and be left, but no one thought to probably go in. But how would they know?
And we don't talk to our neighbours the way we used to.
Of course we don't. No.
You know, we did a little bit during COVID and post-COVID. That definitely was improved upon during that time. But now we're a few years on and people are back to being busy and life's gone on. And there's, you know, in a lot of places, not those relationships now. They're not knocking on each other's door once a week and checking in on each other now, because they've just got on with things.
And you know what? You know, people move on. You got, you know, different kind of living environments now. You know, you're no longer buying a property and necessarily living in it for 20 years. You're no longer necessarily even renting a flat for a year. Yeah. And this is what I talk about, this future living piece. It's all about flexibility. And so actually, depending on the building style you're going into, okay, maybe if you're going to co-living, it's community-based. But if you're not, I don't know, mental health issues, people don't know one person from the next, but actually, how do you know if that person's safe within their environment that they're living in? You know, certain data points could show, you know, there's poor ventilation in there, lack of occupancy has been detected, lack of kind of heating's gone, something's going on. And it's actually about, we're now more talking about the well-being of a building, but also the well-being of those who live within the building. And it's almost now that should be the living standard. The whole kind of piece on education, I'm very hot on. Because I actually believe that if you don't educate, bringing you back, yes, I've got 2 young children, that's why I look the way I do. Facelift, please. But, you know, if you don't teach them from a very young age about almost how the world goes round and the decisions they make, we can't make behavioural change. And, you know, my daughter's school is very big on eco-warriors. Love the idea. And I'm going in to be that mum in a few weeks' time to do an assembly. And I can't wait, neither can my daughter. That's the way I'm bribing her at the minute to do good sleep, and that she's going to be the volunteer to get on the stage, and we're going to talk about radar detection, and we're going to talk about water waste. Amazing. And all sorts of other bits and pieces. But these children are sponges, Michelle, and if you can really give them the information in a palatable way, and that's super important, don't overcomplicate it, keep it very, very simple, then actually, what a great starting block. And they often teach their parents, because depending on our social background, that educational piece might not necessarily been there. And social housing, I think, is a really important one, because a lot of homes are deemed to be unfit, and especially this kind of mould kind of piece. But actually, a lot of the time, people don't realise that they're misusing the property. So they might have all their washing everywhere. They might do huge amounts of cooking. They overheat properties. They don't ventilate them properly. And it can be sometimes actually that it's a poor quality of build and that needs addressing, or it could actually be high levels of humidity in there and condensation, which creates this mould and then creates a health risk. But it shouldn't take to the end tenant getting to the point of illness that the property manager understands it. And actually, surely, like through the technology we do, there's an alert which gets sent saying, well, hold on, there's a pattern over a set period of time which says to us there could be a health risk here. And, you know, as much as it's sounding like doom and gloom, it's not, because how great that we've now got technology which can then help you make an informed decision.
And how do you get round, so sort of like the housing association side, that I know we've spoke to a housing association with Utili-Tay, and the concern from the tenants was the council are going to be spying on me, and they're going to be seeing what I'm doing, and it's, you know, not sure I want to have that in there because they'll know if I'm in my house or not. Like, and so how do you get around that piece in terms of not buy-in from the social provider, because I'm sure they see the benefits and are obviously willing to invest in the technology, but the person who's going to be consuming it?
To be honest, we get the question across everything.
Okay.
And depending on the country or location you're dealing with, in particular Germany, where they've got extremely complex privacy laws, everybody thinks it's Big Brother.
Yeah.
And that's what they do. And I think it's just about how you're explaining how it works, and how, you know, everybody assumes there's going to be cameras because we talk about occupancy detection, right? We talk about noise detection, so they assume there's a microphone. It's not Alexa, who's actually gone, there's a camera and you have smoking, and Alexa says, stop smoking, and you're like...
She's everywhere
Who
now.
said that? Yeah, she's very famous, or Alexa. But actually, it's actually the other way, saying, well, look, nobody's spying on you. There is a privacy policy here, but actually ensuring it's done for the right reasons for the end user, because what I think at the moment is that everybody thinks that it's an all or nothing, whereas our approach is, look, if it's social housing, what are the main concerns? And across the social housing piece, you've got so many different types of end user. You've got very vulnerable end users.
Absolutely.
You've got, it could be shared owners. It could be that you've got intermediate rent or social rent. You've got different levels. Each one of them presents their own benefits and I guess challenges. And I think through the technology, and this is what we love about the Resicentral piece, is it's customisable. So it's saying, look, we're not going to stick in a device and the end user is going to be monitoring every last thing, because it might not be that actually noise is a problem.
Because the build means that it's not a problem, or the structure means
Correct.
it's not an issue.
You know, that might not be it at all.
Yeah.
But it might actually be something to do with it's an older block. It's part of a way bigger kind of regen program. You know, there isn't all these big pots of money, which I'm sure everybody wishes they were. So for us, it's like, well, actually the technology goes in there and it helps you then do your planning for major works. So even though in your portfolio you go, actually, building number 2 is the next on the list, well, actually, if it comes out that building 7 on the list actually has got the worst in terms of heat installation, the worst on air quality, well, actually, maybe that's helping making that decision. And I think it's about getting that point over to the end resident. What we're doing, the reason for it, and what the data's there for. And I think for them, it's that educational piece of showing them, Michelle, saying this is exactly what it does. And, you know, at that point, hopefully the education, there won't be an objection, but I think they're thinking cameras, microphone, a bit like this, actually. Maybe
lights.
Maybe they think it's like a podcast, but, you know, and I don't blame them. You know, if you look at the world that we're living in now, everywhere you go, there's a camera around every corner. There's something being recorded, you know, even from every taxi you get into, they've all got a dash cam. You know, the world has become that place. But I think it's just getting across the benefit to them. And social housing is complex because of the great work they do across different people, but the privacy piece is something that we have massively invested in to make sure that we get that right for the end business and operator, but also whoever's going to be that occupier.
So in terms of the sector and what you do, what's the next evolution of what you do, and how would that potentially benefit?
That is the $1 million question. So for us, it's about how you customise it. So in theory, our devices could work on everything. But one of my MD's favourite sayings, you can't boil the ocean, comes to mind. So even though we're a business that can touch every part of, you know, anything from commercial to hospitality to institutional, whatever it may be, for us right now, it's concentrating on the areas where probably need us the help most. Yeah. And hospitality is a humongous one, like without a shadow of a doubt, because of the energy waste. Yeah. We're also working with developers to help them create that living experience, probably for the latest generation, because actually the expectation is that they'll control their property from their phone. So I think that for us, it's future-proofing. That's really where we're going. So it's going back and doing the retrofit piece to actually bring things up to standard and have the metrics in place. But for us now, the next step is future-proofing, so that actually the decisions that are made going forward are actually done on data. We've got some exciting stuff, don't get me wrong, in R&D, covering stuff like the care sector. At the moment, our devices can, of course, work within the senior living piece, but actually they can go one step further on stuff like trip and fall detection. Great. Quite an exciting piece.
And we'd all like that in our homes. I've got old people live with me, and
I thought you meant just for you. I thought you just meant for you.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I want my husband to know when I fell over on a Saturday night.
Well,
but,
you know.
But for me, you know, my parents live with me. My dad's a bit older. My mum's disabled, and that peace of mind, even that somebody gets sent an alert when that detection happens, because you know you do worry. And I think certainly the care homes that Utili-Tay work with, that is a concern, because there's less staff now. There's less people checking in a room, and people are able to stay in their rooms if that's what they want to do. So how do you know that the residents are safe?
And it's also pride, right? The senior living piece is really delicate. Yeah. And again, being an absolute geek, I did a big research piece on this last year. Read a fantastic book called It's About Time. Fabulous. I'd recommend it to anyone. And it was going through the sales process of how senior living works, and saying that, you know, there's a real 2-year process in that for the person. Yeah, it's huge. It's one of the slowest marketplaces. And when we talk about senior living, very different to a care home. Yep. And the idea being that, you know, you go in there when you can, not when you have to. And
it's independence, isn't it?
Huge. And you know, I think, you know, my husband and I, when we talk about kind of retirement and what we will do, we're totally up for getting rid of the big house the minute the kids are gone. Like, you know, goodbye to that. You can have us round for Sunday roast. You can have us round for Christmas, right? That all goes, because that's what the generations do. They keep the big homes for twice a year when they come home for Easter and Christmas. But actually, at that point of maybe, you know, 65, 70, that you enjoy, you know, 10, 20, 30 years of living a really good life. And then the other side to it is then actually when you have to, when actually care is required. But what I think is a really fascinating point is how you can keep people within their own homes for longer where families don't live nearby. Yeah. And for me, that's where the technology could really come into play, because you were worried about your family, right? If you were to go on holiday, Michelle, now with your partner, as you said, your parents living with you, you just want to check in.
You don't want to ask them every day.
Correct.
Because that's going to annoy them.
And also there's this pride piece, because even if they could afford to pay the bill, or you're paying the bill, actually works the other way, I think, for the older generation. They don't go in and whack the heating up. They probably sit there freezing cold. So we go complete ends of the scale, don't we, on this?
They'll put a blanket or a jumper on rather than turn the heating up a dial.
Which is great, but at the same time, at what point does that go too far, and to do with vulnerabilities and healthcare issues? So I think the fact that the future-proofing part is fabulous, because actually you've got the ability to look after them and sometimes keep them at home for a longer period of time, because actually, you know, the old bells round the neck if they fall over, well, that's all well and good, but what if you hit your head? You can't push the button. Yeah. You know, certainly I know when I was younger, my granddad had a fall and we were on holiday. You didn't have mobile phones there. He was found 3 days later. You know, if that could have been cold weather, catch pneumonia, then older people die. But, you know, we need to evolve that. So I think definitely it's the future-proofing, and also making sure people are comfortable. And you know, older people are vulnerable. That's just what, you know, the situation is, but also give them a bit of dignity, and not making them feel like they've got to have someone checking on them every 5 minutes. And the operational piece is massive, Michelle, across everything we've spoken about. You know, how do you manage properties, but also how do you manage people within properties without treading on their toes? And I think you're right. You know, there used to be, you know, you'd have a care home and you'd see all of the staff around the whole time. Well, it doesn't pay like that anymore. But actually, does a resident have a bit of embarrassment if something goes wrong, if they have an accident? Do they want people to know about that? You know, there was an example piece of someone within the business who said that their granddad had had an accident but didn't want the embarrassment, so waited for everyone to go to bed and the nurse to come in to tell them something had happened. There should be a way now, which is the stuff that we're able to do, that they could alert them. Yeah. And I think it's that kind of dignity if they're within a care facility, but also keep them at home. You're not spying, but you actually go, it's a bit cold in there, I'm just going to turn mum's heating up. Yeah. Or actually, she's got a habit that every morning she does get up at 7. Sorry, mum, this is all about you. She does get up at 7. She does have a marmalade on toast at 10 past. She does do this at a certain point, that actually if you see a pattern then changes, it can often trigger that something's gone wrong. And
it's just a check-in at that point. It's
Absolutely.
Not all the time, because you can do the alerts that say something's not as expected.
Yeah, and it's well-being, no?
Yeah, so many different things to talk about in different ways of doing it. I guess the key really is technology and data should be driving our decision-making, and whether that be in our homes, in our businesses, or in our accommodation that we're letting out to people in the future, we need that information to make decisions on return on investment, keeping people safe, comfortable, and also our own investments. I mean, ultimately, we've spent money on properties. If we're in the property sector or we're a hotel, you've spent money on that. If there's a flood or an issue, you want to know as soon as possible, and you want to address it as soon as possible. So it gives us that security as well.
It's an all-rounder. I think the ops piece is super exciting, and I can't wait to see that evolve. You know, I've worked within businesses who've had operational teams that they've actually then been able to cut right back. And it's not because actually they just want to make a staff saving. It's like, well, actually, if someone's got a problem with their boiler or perceived, they contact you on an app, you can go into our platform and go, oh, no, it hasn't been switched on. Hold on a sec. Oh, there we go. Oh, actually, every time I do that, it keeps dropping back. Actually, we will send somebody out. But also, I think it's the proactive side to it, Michelle. So actually not waiting for something to be reported, but for someone to say, actually, there's an anomaly, water flow, we better go around and check what it is. So, yeah. I didn't think I could be. I am a geek. I know that. But I didn't think I could be so excited by the possibilities of technology. And it's really extraordinary how it's evolving and so quickly. And I just think it's probably just helping people through that journey, because I think that's the worry at the minute. And you touched on return on investment, and it's really hard when you look at the P&L, because a cost saving doesn't necessarily show in the same way that a CapEx does.
Absolutely.
And that's what we kind of have the conversations with a lot of the businesses every day, and they're like, we've got to find this money. And you're like, yeah, you find the money, but actually within, could be 3 to 5 years or a sooner period, depending on the part of the market, it's actually paid for itself, and also paying itself back even more because of the energy savings, or actually the operational part. But I think sometimes just on paper, it's like, well, actually, if we just turn off a light, will it save me money? And it's like, it's not that. It's portfolio performance, right, and helping you make decisions, right, which are data-led. You know where your performance is. Your operational efficiencies are major, which then in turn is your guest satisfaction.
100%.
And then, obviously, the icing on the cake is where you can pull back the money on the energy savings.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you've got the benefits with so many different tax advantages.
Well, yes.
To investing in the first place. So you might look at it and see a number and have a fright, but then you're like, well, you can offset your VAT, you can offset this. You know, there's so many different levels of that. There's been the super tax they've been able to do.
Yes.
Some companies that Utili-Tay have worked with have been able to get grants from certain councils in Scotland. Not all of them, unfortunately.
No, we'd love that, yeah.
You know, and it couldn't be systemised and equal across the country. That would just be too easy. But 10 different application forms. But, you know, that whole piece around, there's always a way. If you genuinely believe something's the right thing for your business, there's always a way to make it happen. You just need to make the commitment. And that doesn't matter whether it's a 4-bedroom house that you're doing as a service accommodation, or a 100-bedroom hotel, or anything in that space. It ultimately needs the same decision. It needs the person who has the purse strings to decide, I want to do differently.
And you're totally spot on. You know, there has to be a complete shift in the mindset. And at what point do you come unstuck? And this isn't going to be an opt-in or opt-out. Yeah. This is going to be an opt-in, but at what stage? And I guess from our perspective, it's understanding what you're trying to get out of it. And back to earlier in the conversation about these tech stacks, some of this stuff, people have ended up with maybe 10 different providers trying to provide 10 different things. Then they're trying to integrate the whole lot. Yeah. And then they've got all this data and they're going, wow, how do I consolidate it? How do I even know what it really means in real terms? I don't. And then back to the cost piece. Again, this is why we like to take people through the journey and go, look, there's a starting point. And we always talk about their green strategy. You know, what does your portfolio look like? Should we test it on this piece first? We're very good at giving people the ability to get references or case studies of others within the sectors that they're in. On top of that, we're very keen to offer some test kit. You know, for us, we want to make it work for the clients the same way that we do with them. But it's also offering probably different payment options. Depending on the business, they don't necessarily have the budget now, but I know next year with the whole ESG part, and I was having a conversation on the way here today that ESG 2 years ago was a buzzword. It was great. If you wanted to get people to join a conference or a webinar, just mention ESG and everyone will come running. Mention ESG now, they will go running the other way because it's no longer a buzzword. It is a requirement. There's no more greenwashing. You know, all of this has to go. And part of that is how you're going to report. Now, without the kind of tech behind it, it's going to be pretty difficult to do that. But also it's allowing them for a budget for that. Because actually we talk about people's green smart journey. Predominantly we do the E within the ESG. That, you know, that's where we sit within that space. But actually helping people go, look, where are your inefficiencies? What can we improve? And making those plans with them. And then from a budget perspective, you know, the people I spoke to kind of talking about next year, actually they're putting money aside for tech, which is quite interesting because before tech was a novelty, right? Wasn't a necessity. It was kind of nice to have. I fancy a bit of that. We've had a couple of problems with noise. We'll put in noise detection. A couple of leaks would do that. Whereas actually whole property performance is a major thing. If you look at landlords, kind of the EPC ratings.
Yeah, absolutely. They just changed that. So we weren't going to be able to let properties unless they were C or more.
Correct.
It's got pushed back, but it's going to come.
It's definitely coming.
It's coming. It was going to be there, and the only reason it got pushed back is because they hadn't done enough work and didn't have the bodies on the ground to go and check it. Let's be honest. So
that is,
and actually, it's being a good landlord is doing that. It's
responsible.
Not, it's the right thing to do, not just the legal thing to do.
And you know what, there's so many negative kind of connotations being kind of pushed on that. Another way to get landlords out of the market. Well, no, actually it's to protect the tenant.
Yes.
And, you know, from a personal experience where I live in a semi-detached, and we had the landlord from hell next door until we luckily sold to the most wonderful family a year ago, but didn't care about the end tenant. You know, the house was in a pretty dreadful state. And his reason for selling in the end was the EPCs coming in. I know that if I do the 20 grand, well, I don't want to do the 20 grand anyway to show that I've tried to do the improvements. It will never really work. And actually, it will put people off actually coming to let the property. So then that becomes the kind of decider point where actually people are looking at your business and going, number one, when it comes to funding or investment, well, what's your ESG or your green strategy? Oh, I don't have one. Doesn't look great for lenders. It just doesn't. If you're trying to get investment and you're going for investment rounds, you haven't got that in place, doesn't look good. The people coming to your Airbnb property, people coming to your apart hotel, whatever it may be, actually, you don't care about sustainability. So actually, without it, there is a knock-on, psychologically or not. And I think the great thing now is that people are seeing, well, actually, to accurately report, I've got to have this tech. And then they're being a bit inspired by going, oh, it can do this. And you're like, it can. And, you know, it is a slow journey. Nobody likes change. Actually, I do. Love a bit of change, me. But I think it's the exciting part to kind of the way the world's going. And I think with time, once people kind of get used to that, that'll be the norm. Look at a mobile phone. God, 20 years ago, we were all talking about a mobile phone. This would never rule our life, you know. You just take it out and you use it if you need it in case you haven't got the 10p for the phone box. Could you imagine now that you do everything? Your whole life revolves around your phone.
Yeah, on your computer, basically, you carry around with you.
So, you know, why wouldn't the rest of everything that you do be able to be a platform, a notification, a smart way of living? So, I don't know, you and me could talk for England on this.
I know, amazing. Well, that probably is enough for today. So thank you so much for coming in and chatting to me. I'm sure there'll be other opportunities in the future for us to talk about things as your tech evolves, and also as the Property Wealth team actually start installing it in some of their own developments. We can talk about how that's come about and share that with people as well. So that's it for today, guys. If you want to keep following us, just follow the page and ensure you're with us next time round when we have another guest joining us, and we're going to be talking all about architecture and at what point do you get an architect involved in the plans. Maybe at the point you start looking at the tech and you say to them, where do I need my stuff? Have a great day, guys. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers. That's it.